Welcome to Dr. Deo Durban Online. We're a church family on mission to see Durban change into a place where Jesus reigns. Here is this week's message.
Now, with that being said, let's dive into this week's series, week number 2. It's the new series called Chasing the Sun. I'm going to be spending time in Matthew chapter 5. If you have a Bible, you're more than welcome to open up there, that everybody is on the same page. And while you're opening up, let me quickly just catch you guys up. This series is based on the documentary called Chasing the Sun, S-U-N, not Chasing the Sun, S-O-N. And it's a documentary of Rassie Erasmus taking the Springboks from zeros to the worst Springbok team ever to becoming a double world champion. 2 times in a row winning the Rugby World Cup. And I thought it's such a brilliant series with regards to the way Jesus looks at us. You know, Jesus arrived in the time when humanity was really in a dire space. And he alone, he decided he's going to kick off something really amazing. And he got his little bomb squad together, if I can call it that. And he activated them. And he said, guys, I can take the world from here to here. And we read about this little story actually in Matthew chapter 5, right at the beginning. It's the Sermon on the Mount, or in Afrikaans, the Bergprediking. It's one of the most famous sermons. And Jesus is taking us on a journey where he gives us like 9 blessings, and it's like 3 little triads. And in these 3, he tells us 4 things in total in that little portion that we're going to be focusing on. Last week, we looked at the first one, where Jesus says, this is the bomb squad. These are the guys that will be coming and will be ready to bring heaven into earth, into this world. So who's going to be the guys that's going to step onto the field of life and that will make the changes and that will impact the world as we know it today? Who will be the bomb squad? Who will make sure that humanity ultimately wins? And then he gives us 3 people: the poor, the grieving, and the unimportant, the meek, the unimportant and afflicted. And he said, these 3 guys, they will most likely be ready to bring heaven into earth because they are the ones that's ready to receive heaven. Just one little example for you guys that missed us last week in terms of the poor. You know, I meet people mostly coming to ask me for help and praying deeply, Jesus, help me, when they're poor in some other area. I had a relational struggle. I'm poor there. I have poor family relationships. I have poor friendships. I'm struggling with my finances. Then we're ready to receive what Jesus wants to give. That's usually how it happens. So there's something about those guys that's open to receive the goodness of Jesus. And when they receive it, they become carriers of it. They bring it through. Okay, so that's last week. This week, we're diving into the dream. Jesus is busy casting a vision. So the ultimate coach of heaven and earth is standing before us, and he's saying, guys, bomb squad, here's the dream. This is what I want us to do. And to dive in there, I quickly want to open up with a question. Who of you guys were alive during the 1995 World Cup? Hands up. Who of you guys can still remember the 1995 World Cup? Can you remember where you were during the 1995 World Cup? Can you remember the place? I see some of the older folk here, the experienced guys. The guys that actually knows what it means when Sia says, nobody will understand what it means to be a South African. Or in the immortal words of Driekus, hulle weet nie wat ons weet nie. Nah? I remember it still very clearly when I was young. I was in grade 2 actually when this happened. And we were watching that game with our life group that I grew up in. From grade 1, we were in that life group, and those people were even at my wedding day with me in Gerda. And it was about a block away from Kolletjies Cafe. My wife will know exactly where that is. It's not too far from the local cafe there, and they loved actually buying stuff there. And we were watching the game, and I'll never forget this moment. It was very, very powerful. It like big moment in my life. And one of the ladies, her name was Tannie Lindy. Yes, and I love that lady. She was so full of life. She just loved life and knew a lot of stuff. And I remember while she's watching the game, how passionate she got with watching this game. And we were in the overtime slot, and she was like, Joel, is jou nou oorskop beauty. Sy hom oorskop, en toe hy hom oorskop, jou beauty, ek Sunyo Buta. So there was lots and lots and lots of joy. And at that stage, South Africa then was, positioned to win the World Cup 1995. And then finally, when that whistle blew, it was celebrations. It was amazing. It was wonderful. And then we saw the famous picture of Nelson Mandela walking onto the scene with his number 6 jersey and wearing the Springbok on his heart. And we've later heard the story of Francois saying he just bursted into tears when he saw that. He couldn't believe it. And for some of us that lived that day would know that that was more than just a World Cup win. Because that day, there was unity for this country. And there were 2 guys that played kind of a pivotal role in this. The one was Mr. Mandela, and he had a plan to unite, to bring people that felt marginalized, rejected within this country together. And he reached out to a guy called Francois Pienaar, and he asked him, guys, we need to make this baby happen. And there were 2 moments for me, the one that I've mentioned with Mandela, with the number 6 jersey, but the other one that stood out to me so much was the moment when they interviewed Francois about this moment, that he is holding the World Cup in his hands, and he's asking him, Francois, how does it feel to have 60,000 South Africans behind you? And the next moment when he got the mic, he says, we're not 60,000 South Africans, we're 430 million. And he just changed the picture in that moment. He said perspective. And the reason why I'm mentioning this story is probably the reason why the Springboks today is a beacon of hope for this country. It resembles a moment where we could get a glimpse of the dream of relationships that were broken in the past has an opportunity to be healed in the present. We saw a little bit of that unity dream within the Springboks. Before that moment, in fact, you had 2 different groups in the game, 2 different spectators. One group of guys, all the white Afrikaan boykies, they would be screaming for the Springboks, and the rest of the country would be screaming for the All Blacks. They would like, lekker. No? But that was a moment where people could see a dream. And that's kind of the responsibility, in essence, that we've placed within our Springbok team. That's kind of the thing that you hear Rassie speaking about, but when he talks to Sia and he says to Sia, the biggest thing in South Africa is not Sia. It's South Africa. You have a bigger responsibility on your hands. So today, we're kind of getting that opportunity. Jesus is sharing with us the dream that we're all actually really longing for within our hearts. And we see that in the second part of this little Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. You can read with me. Verse 6 goes as follows. He says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And we're only going to read that far for today. Now, in these 3 verses, we can see 3 things. We see Jesus telling us what's the dream. And he tells us what's the plan to make that dream happen, what's the steps to make it happen. And lastly, he tells us what's the power. Where are we going to get the resources to make this dream a reality in our lives? So I want to dive in firstly by looking at what's this dream. And the dream is found in verse number 6, where Jesus says, the good life are for those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. That is the dream. The dream is for those who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness. He's going to fill them. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. First, hunger and righteousness. Any of you guys like me struggle with a severe case of hangry? Anybody? Do you know what hangry is? Hangry is basically this. You look like this before you eat, and then after you eat, you look like this. Okay, so once again, me before food, me after food. That's the picture, okay? So being hungry, being thirsty, even though we're laughing about this moment and we're looking so happy, is really not a comfortable space to be in. When Jesus says, if you hunger, if you thirst, it's not a comfortable space. I don't know how many of you guys have kept yourself from eating or couldn't have some food or couldn't enjoy some quality drinks or lus is vir daai koutjie. You get what I'm saying? We're not talking just about lust. We're talking about you would die just to get a glass of water now. That's how thirsty you are. It's very uncomfortable. It's a space that we don't want to live in. And Jesus says, the good life is coming to you. It's coming to the hangry, the guys that's really, really, really deeply longing. But they're not hungry for food. They're hungry for something else. They're hungry for something called righteousness. Now, quickly tell the person next to you, what do you think righteousness means? My wife has been looking at Lord of the Rings. She's enjoying the movie, watching it, and she says righteousness would happen when the orcs die. That would be amazing. She just absolutely hates watching the orcs. Any case, so righteousness, in the best sense of the word in the Bible, if you go and look up all the spaces this little word righteousness is being used, it primarily refers to relationships that we have with people, with God's creation, and with God Himself. And righteousness, in its simplest definition, is doing right by your neighbor and by God. So living right towards the relationships that you're in. That's what righteousness means. In other words, when it comes to people, whether it's your friend, your family member, even your enemy, God wants you to treat them right. The best way to do it is by doing justly towards them, doing justice, and treating them with dignity as the image and the likeness of God. That's the challenge for us. Now, I know it sounds very simple when I put it out there. Great, wonderful to understand, Lorraine. I will treat people right. But what if, and then we start filling in the blanks. What if the taxi just came in front of me during my chill drive? You get what I'm saying? That's the easy ones. So there's this challenge for us to do right. And in all honesty, if you've experienced someone doing wrong to you, have you? I believe if you're sitting here, everybody here will be saying yes. If you're saying no, you just simply have not lived long enough to testify about that wrong in your life. It's going to happen. Come to me. I'll pray for you. It's going to be a rough awakening. The point is, we all long for relationships to be in a good space, to be right. So, secondly, when it comes to our relationship with others, we get a bit of an idea of what it means to do right. Sometimes we look for wisdom. I'm going to share with you guys a little bit more. Jesus gives us that. But when it comes to being in right relationship with God, what does that look like? So when I say, that person did right by me, I understand it. I need to do right by them, I understand that. But what does it mean to do right by God? Quickly tell the person next to you, what do you think? I want you guys to think about this. I'm going to share a story, but I want you to first just quickly share the person next to you. What does it mean to do right by God? To live in right relationship with Him? Quickly think about that. I heard a few nice examples and ideas. Some said to love your neighbor, to love the people around you, like Jesus says, love one another as I've loved you. Some says doing His will. Others say doing stuff that will please Him and give you a high five. Others will say just to give everything over to Him. So that's what it would mean to do right. So to get a good grip on this, I think I want to tell you guys a story. It's a story of Abraham. And most of us know this story. And there is a very significant moment in Abraham's life where we see God telling him that he did right by him, which is quite powerful. And this story is in Genesis chapter 15. It's going to be on the screen there. But to give you guys the background of the story, before we dive in there, you can go back one. So Abraham, at this stage, came from his fatherland with two promises that God gave him. He said to him, I will give you a new land. Go to the land that I will give you, and I will give you offspring. And through your offspring, I will bless the nations. So two promises, land and a child. I'm going to give you those two. And Abraham has been on quite the journey with those. He arrived in the land. God said to him, this is the land. Abraham says, I don't like this land. Egypt looks a little bit better. This one is a little bit filled with famine. So he takes his stuff, he leaves. He arrives in Egypt, he lies to Pharaoh, and later on, he deceives Pharaoh actually, and later on he gets chased out of Egypt, but he takes a few slaves with him. One of them is called Hagar. That will later play a role in the story. We then finally meet Abraham back in the promised land, and he is, in essence, in a place of hopelessness. And he's speaking to God. Because for some other reason, God said they will have a child, but Sarah is not getting pregnant. And he's patiently waiting, and nothing's happening. So then we see this one night when Abraham starts speaking to God about his journey. And he tells God, he refers to one of his slaves and he says, or family members, his nephews, he says, when I die, everything that I have and that you've given me will just go to him, because still I do not yet have an heir. You have not provided a son for me. I have nothing. And it's in that moment that God reaches out to him and he shares this very famous verse. It says here, verse 5, God took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. God gives him this promise in verse 5. So God tells Abraham, don't worry. What I've promised will happen. I am with you. I'm not going to hold back on this. And then the very next verse, it says the following. Abraham believed the Lord, and he, that's the Lord, credited it to him, that's Abraham, as righteousness. So how do we do right by God? Well, we believe. What does it mean to believe? Well, it means you put your faith in something. You choose to trust something to do life with. You decide who you're going to trust. That's the principle. So how do we do right by God? We trust him. That's the easiest way of doing it. Some of us, we put our faith in, we do this every day, we put our faith in things that we can see. Others put our faith in things that we can control. Others put our faith in things that we feel like putting our faith in. However, God says, when you live right by me, you simply just trust me. You know what's interesting about this? Because the very next few verses, I'm not going to put it on the screen, but just a little side note, you can read it for yourself. It's really an interesting story. Abraham continues asking God about the land. And it's as if he doesn't have faith. It doesn't say after he's asked about that God says, and Abraham believed. It's like God gets together a whole covenant story and he puts together extra assurances to make sure that Abraham just sees this thing is going to happen. And that's the big chapter of God engaging and entering into covenant with Abraham at that moment for the land. It's almost as if a covenant, in this case, it's going to sound weird when I'm saying this, it's a kind of relationship that we can have with God, is almost more than what we need to do right by God. It's almost like a crutch for us. To do right by God, you don't even need covenant. You just need to trust him. What he says, you do. Believe him. Just walk the way he's calling you to do. That's part of the reason why God tests people. He's testing to see whether we trust him. Cool. So, there we have it. The dream is for everyone to live in right relationship with one another and with God. But if you're a realist sitting here this morning, you would be like, Lorraine, wow, that's great. But that's a little bit difficult. How do I always live right with other people? And more important, how do I restore the wrong that's happened to me? I'm glad that you've asked, because Jesus says, Bomb Squad, here's the plan. Here's the way we're going to see righteousness filling this earth. That we will see right relationships in every nook and cranny and corner and dark space within Durban, within your life, within your family, be restored. Here's the plan. 2 steps. And it's the next 2 verses. It is the first one, step 1. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Step 1 is give mercy. Forgive those who's wronged you. Jesus says the way to live in right relationship is the opposite of what most of us want. We want revenge. We want to get back, and then we become contributors. He says, no, give that to me. Justice belongs to the Lord. He says, you, Bomb Squad, to get everything right in this world, to restore broken relationships, the move is give mercy. Forgive. In fact, I found this so profound. Desmond Tutu said the following: there is no future for humanity without forgiveness. Just think about that. Feels like I want to read that again. He makes such a profound statement. There is no future for humanity without forgiveness. And the reason why it's so profound to me is I realize I would probably not even be sitting here if that man and a few other people in this country did not decide to live by that statement. I would not have a future here, most likely, if it was allowed for war to happen. And we didn't see people choosing the road of forgiveness for wrongs. Just using that example. I'm now sitting on the other side of that coin. Previous time I was part of the group that had been forgiven. Now I'm on the part of this group that need to forgive. You know, the corrupt government officials, they need to come and sit in the church, and we need to love them. That's the journey. That's the tax collectors. That's the picture. Step 1. I don't need to talk about that too much. I think everybody knows what I'm saying here. Step 2. Not only do I want you to give mercy, but I want you to give mercy with pure motives. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. It's like Jesus is saying, guys, you can do your righteousness. You can be right by others. Sometimes you need to forgive. Sometimes you need to be generous. Sometimes you need to be nice. Sometimes you need to support. Sometimes you need to speak a word of encouragement and whatever it may be, doing right by someone else. But he knows something that we also have found out very quickly when you're young. We can fake it quickly. Hence the reason why later in this sermon he says, be careful not to do your righteousness or practice your righteousness before others so that they may see. Yes, they will give you a big hand, but that's all you'll get out of it. So there's this warning for us to genuinely be pure of heart, to do good towards those, because we are convicted. We are filled with the love of Jesus to go out and do it. That's the plan. Very simple. Give mercy to the broken spaces, and wherever you're reaching out to live right by others, don't do it with a false heart. Don't be faking it. Be real. Check your heart. Love those honestly, sincerely, deeply. That's the steps. Very easy to remember, correct? Everybody with me? Very difficult to practice, correct? Everybody with me? Not so easy. You know, there's so many times in my life, I just quickly want to put it in there because it's like putting my heart on the table. It's so easy for me to preach well because I want you guys to give me a hand afterwards. Am I doing right by you guys to do that? To preach for your applause? No, you'll find quickly that I'm abusing you to glorify myself. Do you see what's happening? It's an opportunity to truly serve. So wherever we work, wherever we give to Him and with a pure heart. Okay. So if you notice it's easy to fake it and it's so difficult to do those two things, probably the last question would be, where do we get the power to live like this, Lorraine? Where does the bomb squad get the resources? Like Rassi went to DSTV, Supersport, and said, boys, you need to help us. We need to make this thing happen. If you've ever watched the documentary, you'll know what I'm talking about. The Springboks didn't have any sponsorships. They didn't have any money to make anything happen. They had a dream. He had his team, but he needed resources to actually make that dream a reality. Where do we get that resources? Well, it's captured in this little word righteousness for us. You know, Jesus is the embodiment of righteousness. He's the picture of what it looks like to do right by everyone. God can never, ever relate to anyone or any person in a wrong way. Do you know that? Whenever he engages with you, some of us might not even believe it. Sometimes we think he's wrong in the way he's treating me. But I promise you, he is the embodiment of righteousness. He always does right by you and by the people around him. So, to explain that a little bit better, I want to ask Pierre to come and join me here in front. That we can see what's the picture of righteousness. So here is the picture of righteousness. Do you guys see? It's amazing, this ook, yeah. Okay, Pierre, jy moet so staan, jy net so na vriend mense wys, okay. Okay, so this word righteousness is actually a word that we many times use in the justice system, or even in business. And the scales of justice. And the word righteousness is the word tzadok. And tzadok is actually that little beam there at the top that should be equal or level in a business deal. So when you're on a business deal, if that thing is level, this is a righteous and a just transaction. So the moment that thing is equal, it's called righteous. And that's actually the word that's being used all over in the Bible for righteousness, especially in the Greek side, in the New Testament, okay? So what I have here is I have my scales of justice. If I can ask Pierre to quickly just become a scale by doing this, putting both your hands out. Okay, so here we have a scale. You can put out your hands. Thank you very much. And in the beginning, God decided to make us in his image and his likeness. And there you go, one hand. Keep it straight like that, baby. Straight now. And that's the other one. Okay, cool. So in the beginning, God created us in his image and his likeness. And we, in other words, carried the same level of glory on this earth. We were called to represent God in the same way. We read about this in Psalm chapter 8. You can go for it. Psalm chapter 8. Thank you. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. The word glory is actually the word doxa. If ever you wondered what's our name means doxa. And that also is a word that represents weight. So in here, there's a little bit of something in here. No, correct? Okay, cool. Okay, so there's a little bit of weight. There's a bit of glory in here. And God crowned us with glory by calling us and giving us this privilege to be his representatives, carry his image and his likeness on this planet. Okay, but something happened in Genesis chapter 3. Can I continue with the story? Chill it out. Okay, so it says, Genesis chapter 3, verses 23, that we have all sinned and we have fallen short of that glory. So in other words, we've given up our weight. So what happened was, there was a little bit of weight. Give me like this. We had a little bit of weight in us. You see, ons het blondjies en so. Okay, and we have fallen short of this. We've chucked this away. We said, I don't want to be like God in the way he made me. I want to do it my own way. What happened with the scale, do you think? Which side went up? That side. Yeah. You can see what happened with the scale on the right-hand side. Okay, and I'm so happy that happened because ever since then, this scale had an imbalance. Because the two sides of the scale, the relationship, which is also like 1 equals 1. There's a verhouding. The relationship, 1 equals 1, that's a just relationship. 1 does not equal 2, correct? Okay, that's an unjust relationship. So now we have an unjust relationship. This side, we have a few lightweight people. That side, we have a glorious, weighty, powerful, holy God, and something is not working here. Good example is, this side is you, that side is your doggy. And you and your doggy will never have the same level of relationship as you and your husband or you and your wife, correct? Because you don't equal one another. You do not equal your doggy, correct? Same level of glory is not there. So that's kind of the picture. And from that moment on, humanity experienced a break in their relationship with God. So how do we fix this? Well, that's Romans 3, verse 24. It says, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. So God did us a huge favor by redeeming us through Jesus. We call it grace. But how did this practically look? Well, it looks something like this. 2 Corinthians says the following. God made Jesus, him, who had no sin. Here we are. He had no sin, to become sin, to empty himself of the glory that he had. So that, listen to this one, we, kan ons so, go up there. The moment this happens, what happens with the scale? We become right again. The way we tried to do this was by packing as many works inside of this bag, which is just pieces of paper. And it will never be strong enough and heavy enough to balance the scale. So God decided, I will give you something that you don't deserve so that we can restore this again and live in relationship with one another once again. You can give Pierre a big hand. Thank you very much. Pierre's scale of justice. Now you might ask, why is that so important to understand? Here's the reason why. The place where we draw our power from is a person. God sent him down, Holy Spirit, so that we can be his witnesses. And if you are still in a space where you're struggling with relationship with Jesus and with his Spirit, you will never be able to love. If you're still in a space where you haven't experienced his love for you, and trust me, you get confronted to love like he does every time someone does not love you. And every time he calls you to go and do something that you don't want to do, that's too difficult, that's like, nee, jy bietjie te groot vir my. I'm not ready yet for this. Where do you go to do this? Where do you run to? You run to Daddy's lap, and you go and sit on his lap, and you go and get empowered by the King himself through his Spirit and his love being made real in your life. That's the way we forgive. It's only when you have been forgiven and as you walk with the King.
Thanks for joining us online today. As a family, we would love to meet you in person, so plan a visit to our Doxodeo Durban campus by going to doxodeo.org/Durban.